My friends, today I want to tell you a story. It's not about giants in the Bible or warriors in ancient battles. No, it's about an elephant. You see, one day a man walked into a camp, and there in front of him stood these mighty creatures. Elephants, strong, capable of uprooting trees, capable of shaking the earth with a step. But do you know what held them? Not chains, not cages, just a little rope tied around their legs. And he asked, why don't they break free? And the trainer said, because they don't believe they can. Oh, listen to me tonight. How many of us are just like those elephants, bound not by ropes, not by chains, but by the lies we believed long ago? Someone said you weren't good enough. Someone said you'd never make it. Maybe you told yourself, I can, but let me tell you, in the name of the Lord, you are stronger than you think. The Bible says in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Don't live your life believing the rope is stronger than your spirit. Don't let yesterday's failure be today's prison. Break free, child of God, because whom the Son sets free is free indeed. A man once visited an elephant camp during his travels. As he walked among the towering animals, he noticed something peculiar. These enormous creatures, some of the strongest animals on earth, were tied to small wooden stakes in the ground using nothing more than a thin rope. No chains, no cages, just a small piece of rope around one leg. It puzzled him. These elephants could easily break free with a single tug, yet they stood calmly, not even trying to escape. The man couldn't help but marvel at the scene. He had seen elephants in the wild, powerful and commanding, capable of knocking down trees and lifting logs with their trunks. But here they were, held back by something so weak in comparison to their strength. The curiosity grew stronger in his mind, and he had to ask someone. He approached a nearby trainer, a man who had worked with these animals for years, and asked, why don't these elephants try to break free? Surely they could escape any time they wanted to. The trainer smiled gently as if he had been asked this question many times before. He explained, when they're very young, we use the same size rope to tie them. At that age, the rope is enough to hold them. They try to break free, but they can't. Over time, they stop trying. The man listened intently, struck by the simplicity and depth of what he had just heard. The trainer continued, as the elephants grow older and stronger, they never test the rope again. They believe it's still stronger than they are, even though now they could snap it without effort. The man stood in silence for a moment, watching one of the massive elephants gently sway its trunk, unaware of the invisible prison it lived in. That image stayed with him. A creature of great strength, conditioned to think it was weak, trapped not by the rope, but by its own belief. He began to reflect not just on the elephants, but on people he had known, and even on himself. How often do we carry the weight of our past like that thin rope? How many of us have grown stronger but still believe the limits placed on us long ago? A single failure, a harsh word, a childhood fear, an old voice whispering you can't. These things become the ropes that bind us. We live inside walls that don't exist, stopped not by reality but by the beliefs we've accepted as truth. The man realized that just like the elephant, people often don't question those beliefs. We settle into them. We make peace with limits that were never meant to last forever. He remembered moments in his own life when he had doubted his ability to move forward, times when he had underestimated his own strength because of something someone said or something he once failed to do. He thought of dreams left untouched, potential left unexplored, and opportunities walked away from, all because of a belief that the rope was still strong. That image of the elephant, powerful and mighty, choosing to stand still simply because it believed it could not move, became a mirror to the man's own experience. He saw it clearly now. The real bondage was not physical, but mental. The man walked away from the camp with a changed heart. He didn't need to pull the rope himself to understand its message. The elephants had taught him something deep about the human spirit, something he would never forget. He's surprised they don't try to break free. As he stands there in the middle of the elephant camp watching these massive animals, a strange feeling settles over him. These aren't baby elephants. They're full-grown, majestic creatures with thick trunks, wide ears, and muscles that ripple beneath their thick skin. They could knock down a tree if they wanted to. and yet each one is calmly standing still, a thin rope tied around its leg and connected to a small wooden stake in the ground. It doesn't make sense to him. The rope is clearly not strong enough to hold an elephant. The stake is just a piece of wood. One good tug, just one, and the animal could walk away without the slightest effort, but none of them even try. They don't pull, they don't resist, they just stay. He can't help but feel a growing sense of disbelief. He watches one elephant sway gently from side to side, flicking its tail and occasionally flapping its ears. Another one is playing with some hay, calmly content with its surroundings. But still, they all remain in place, restrained only by something so weak compared to their strength. The man furrows his brow. It isn't fear he sees in the elephants. It isn't submission in the way a wild animal might react to punishment. It's something else, something quieter, almost like resignation, like they've accepted their condition. His eyes scan the camp and he sees the same setup repeated with each elephant. Some are older with worn skin and tired eyes. Some are younger, more energetic, but even they remain tied. He notices the consistency of the rope, thin, worn, and clearly incapable of real resistance. The more he observes, the more it unsettles him. There is something deeply symbolic in this scene, something he can't quite explain yet, but it stirs a strange mix of confusion and sadness in his chest. Why don't they even try? Unable to keep his thoughts to himself, he finally approaches one of the trainers nearby. The man looks kind and relaxed, familiar with the elephants and clearly experienced. "Excuse me," he says, pointing to the nearest elephant. "Why don't they try to break free? They're strong enough, right? That rope can't actually hold them, can it?" The trainer chuckles softly as if he's been asked this question 100 times before. "No," he replies, "that rope wouldn't hold them for a second if they wanted to leave." The trainer pauses for a moment before continuing. "But when they're babies, they're tied with that same rope. At that age, they're not strong enough to break free. They pull, they fight, they struggle, but they can't get loose. Eventually they stop trying. They grow up believing they're stuck. So even when they become strong, even when they could easily walk away, they don't. They don't even try, because they believe the rope still holds them." The man listens, stunned. He turns back to look at the elephants, but now he sees them differently. Before, they were just animals tied to ropes. Now there's something more. Symbols of silent struggle, of strength forgotten, of freedom ignored because of beliefs carried from the past. The man doesn't say anything right away. He just stands there, letting the reality of what he's learned sink in. The image of those mighty elephants, choosing not to move simply because they once failed to escape, hits him in a place he didn't expect. It lingers in his mind like a whisper, one that grows louder with every passing moment. The elephants weren't stuck because they were held back. They were stuck because they didn't believe they could move forward. He asks the trainer why such a small rope can hold such strong animals. The question escapes his lips almost involuntarily, carried by a mix of confusion and curiosity. The image before him doesn't align with anything he knows about strength or freedom. Massive elephants, creatures that could tear down trees and lift logs with ease, stand silently tethered by nothing more than a simple rope looped around one leg. It's not even tightly bound. The rope is frayed in places, worn from time and weather. The wooden stake it's attached to is just as unimpressive, shallowly planted into the earth, offering little resistance. Still, the elephants stay, unmoving except for the occasional sway or flick of the tail. He turns to the nearest trainer, a man who appears calm and accustomed to these animals, and asks, "Why don't they break free? Why does something so small hold them?" The trainer doesn't look surprised. Instead, he smiles gently, as though this question has been asked many times before. There's a quiet understanding in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of observation and reflection. He motions toward one of the elephants, a large one with a broad back and calm eyes, and begins to explain. When they're very young, the trainer says, "We tie them with this same type of rope. Back then, they're not strong enough to break it. They try, they tug and pull, they fight it for days, sometimes weeks, but they fail every time. The man nods slowly, listening intently as the trainer continues. Eventually, the young elephant gives up. It stops trying. It learns that no matter what it does, the rope won't break, and that belief stays with it even as it grows. The words settle over him like a slow wave of understanding. The elephants don't try to escape because they believe they can't, not because they are weak, not because they are actually held back, but because of what they learned in the past. He looks at the elephant again. It seems so peaceful, so unaware of its own strength. It could break the rope with one strong pull, yet it never does. The trainer adds, even now when they could snap the rope without thinking, they don't even try. In their minds, that rope is still stronger than they are. They don't realize how much they've grown. The man finds himself deeply moved. What started as a simple question about an animal has become something far more profound. He isn't just looking at elephants anymore. He's looking at a reflection of human life, of how people live with invisible ropes tied to their minds. He thinks about all the times in life when people stop trying, not because they can't succeed, but because somewhere along the way they were convinced that trying was pointless. A child told they weren't smart enough stops raising their hand. A dreamer who failed once stops dreaming. A voice from the past becomes a permanent chain around the heart. He wonders how many people walk around every day far stronger than they believe, yet held back by ropes they could break if they only tried again. The trainer seems to sense the thoughts crossing his mind and gently adds, the rope doesn't change, the elephant does, but what matters most is what they believe. That simple truth stays with him. He watches as the elephant slowly lifts its foot, then sets it down again within the same circle of earth it's always known. It doesn't test the boundary. It doesn't question the restraint. It simply accepts it, and in that quiet moment, the man realizes how powerful beliefs are, how they can build cages in open spaces, how they can hold giants captive with nothing more than a thread. The trainer explains, when the elephants were young, the same rope was used. The man listens carefully, intrigued by the simplicity of the answer, though he senses there's something deeper beneath the surface. He shifts his gaze back to the massive animal before him, its thick, powerful legs standing still as the thin rope hangs loosely from one of them. The rope looks almost decorative, not something meant to restrain a creature of such enormous strength. Yet the elephant doesn't move. It doesn't struggle. It doesn't even seem curious about what lies beyond the length of that short rope. The trainer continues speaking, his voice calm and measured, as if he's told this story many times before. Back then, when they were small, they didn't have the strength they do now. The rope held them in place easily, and they didn't like it. They fought against it, tried to pull away. They tried everything they could to break free. The man imagines that young elephants, still learning the world, tugging desperately at that rope, filled with energy and frustration. He can almost hear the sounds of their struggle, the tiny trumpets of effort, the tug of hope that freedom might come if they just pulled a little harder. But, the trainer says, pausing for effect, they couldn't do it. They weren't strong enough. So after enough tries, after enough failures, they gave up. He says it without bitterness, only with the clarity that comes from observation. And that's the part that stays with him, not the struggle, not the effort, just the belief that the rope is stronger. The man nods slowly. Something about this makes more sense than it should. It stirs something within him, something that isn't just about elephants anymore. He glances at the other elephants in the camp. Each one is in the same situation, big, powerful, full-grown, and perfectly capable of walking away at any moment. Yet none of them do. They eat, sway, blink slowly in the sunlight. But they remain still, tied not by strength, but by a memory, by a belief formed when they were small, when the world was too big and they were too weak. And now, though the world hasn't changed, they have. Their strength has come, but their belief has not. The trainer watches the man silently process all of this. There's no need to explain more. The truth is simple, and its weight settles slowly. The rope didn't grow stronger. The stake didn't dig deeper. The elephant just stopped believing in its own strength. The man thinks about how many people live their lives this way. trapped by the memory of a time when they couldn't succeed, when they weren't good enough, when they were told no. It becomes a script they carry, repeating silently, "You can't, you won't, don't even try." And so, like the elephant, they grow, they change, but they never test the rope again. He sees now that it's not just about the physical restraint, it's the mental one. It's the deep-rooted belief that resistance is useless, that trying again will only bring the same pain of failure. So they don't. They settle for the space they're given, even when the whole world lies just beyond the edge of the rope. The man doesn't speak, he just keeps watching the elephants, realizing they've accepted a limitation that no longer exists. They could be free, but they don't know it. And perhaps in that quiet understanding, he sees something of himself. At that age, the rope was enough to hold them. It didn't take much, just a short length of coarse fiber tied around a young elephant's leg and staked into the ground. The baby elephant, still uncertain of its strength and place in the world, would tug against it, testing its boundaries. It would pull, sometimes for hours, trying to break free, to explore, to move beyond the circle the rope allowed. But the rope was strong enough and the stake was planted deep enough to stop it. Again and again the little elephant would try. Each attempt met with resistance. Eventually it would stop. Exhausted and confused, it would learn a painful lesson. The rope cannot be broken. What began as a physical truth gradually became a mental one. The elephant didn't understand strength in terms of growth. It didn't know that muscles develop, that size increases, that someday it would become one of the most powerful creatures on land. All it understood was experience. The rope held then, and so it believed the rope would always hold. That belief, formed at such a young age, was not easily undone. The trainer had seen it many times. He watched as small elephants learn their limits, or what they believed were their limits, and how those limits followed them long into adulthood. Years passed. The rope, still the same thickness, now looked tiny against the massive legs of the grown elephants. The stake had not changed either. It no longer needed to. The rope's true power was not in its strength, but in the memory it represented. It was no longer restraining the elephant physically. It was restraining it mentally. The elephant remembered the days it fought and failed. It remembered the frustration, the helplessness, the way it hurt to try and fail again and again. And so it chose not to try anymore. To an outsider, the sight was perplexing. A fully grown elephant, capable of carrying tons, of dragging heavy logs and lifting trees, restrained by a rope so light a child could cut it. But to the elephant, that rope was a wall, an invisible barrier it had accepted. The body had changed, but the belief had not. The man who visited the camp couldn't understand it at first. He saw the size of the animals and the thinness of the rope and assumed the situation was temporary or symbolic, but the trainer explained the story behind the rope. The early conditioning, the power of learned helplessness, the way belief can become stronger than any physical restraint. The man found himself thinking not just about elephants, but about people. He thought about the things that held people back, not real obstacles, but the belief in obstacles. A fear born in childhood, a failure that still whispered in the background, a voice from the past that said, "You can't," and was believed so deeply that it was never questioned again. How many lives, he wondered, are lived within the invisible boundaries of old limitations? How many people walk around every day with the strength to change their lives, to chase their dreams, to escape the rut they feel stuck in, but don't? Because a long time ago, when they were weaker, they were told they couldn't. The rope at that age was enough, but it's not enough now. The elephants don't realize it, and perhaps many people don't either. They live small, not because they are small, but because they've never tested the rope again. As they grew, they never questioned their limitation. What had once been a genuine obstacle became a quiet assumption embedded deep in the mind of the elephant. In their early days, the rope had proven too strong, the stake too firm, and their young bodies too small to escape. Over time, they simply accepted the boundary. The daily tugging ceased, the struggling stopped. And the lesson was learned. The rope cannot be broken. Even as they matured into massive, powerful animals, nothing challenged that belief. Not the passing of years, not their growing strength, not even the weakening of the rope itself. The trainer had watched it happen again and again. A baby elephant would arrive, full of life, full of resistance. It would fight the rope with everything it had. Day after day, the creature would test its limits. But the rope would hold. Eventually something would change. The elephant would grow quiet. The resistance would fade. The body grew, but the belief was planted deep, rooted like the stake in the ground. And so, as the elephant's size increased, its courage did not. The habit of limitation had become second nature. Visitors to the camp were often baffled. They would walk among these enormous animals, observe their calm demeanor, and inevitably ask the same question: why don't they just break free? It was so obvious to those who stood on the outside. The rope was too thin, the stake too weak. One pull and the elephant would be free. But the elephant didn't pull. It didn't even try, because in its mind there was no point. It wasn't being held by the rope anymore. It was being held by a memory. The trainer would explain this to anyone who asked. He would say, they stopped questioning what held them back. They just accepted it. And the moment he said those words, the truth would hit deeper than expected. People would nod slowly, not just in understanding of the animal's condition, but in recognition of something within themselves. How many of them, too, were living lives framed by limits they had never re-examined? Limits placed on them in childhood or in moments of failure or rejection. They had grown, learned, endured, and yet still carried beliefs that no longer fit who they had become. It was easy, in fact, to live within those limits. There was safety in familiarity. There was comfort in not trying again. After all, failure was painful, and the memory of it often louder than the truth of one's growth. Like the elephants, many people stopped testing their boundaries after early defeats. They carried assumptions about their abilities that went unchallenged for years. They stayed in jobs they didn't love, avoided dreams that once lit their hearts, held back words they wanted to speak, all because somewhere along the way they stopped questioning their own rope. The man who visited the camp found himself returning to that thought long after he left. He kept seeing the elephants in his mind, so strong, so calm, so capable, yet quietly confined. He imagined one of them suddenly realizing its strength, taking one step beyond the circle and discovering the rope no longer had power. What would happen then? What if one act of questioning was all it took to reveal a world far bigger than the one they had accepted? He understood now that it wasn't enough to grow. Growth alone doesn't break limits. What matters is the willingness to question them, to ask if what once held you back still does, to wonder if the voice in your head saying you can't is telling the truth, or simply repeating something you believed long ago. The elephants believed they couldn't break free, so they didn't try. That simple belief, shaped when they were young and weak, became the quiet truth they carried into adulthood. When they were small, the rope tied around their leg was too strong and the stake too firm. They had pulled, strained, and resisted with all the strength they had, but every effort failed. The pain of trying, the frustration of defeat, and the repetition of failure slowly carved a belief into their minds. This cannot be broken. That belief stuck, even as everything else about them changed. As they grew, their bodies transformed. They became giants. Beasts of immense power, capable of pulling trees from the ground or carrying burdens heavier than most machines. But despite their strength, they never challenged the rope again. They never tested its hold. Because in their minds, the outcome had already been decided. The rope still held the same power, not because of its physical strength, but because of what they believed about it. And that belief, rooted in early experience, remained unchallenged. People walking through the elephant camp often stopped and stared. It didn't make sense to them. A small rope tied to a thin stake, holding back a creature so powerful. It looked absurd. Why didn't the elephants just walk away? Why didn't they even try? But to the elephants, the struggle had already happened long ago. They remembered it well, even if the world around them had changed. They weren't being held captive by the rope. They were being held captive by the memory of their own past failure. The trainer, when asked, would gently explain the story. He'd say when they were young they tried to break free and failed, so now they don't even try. They think the rope is still stronger than they are. That one sentence often silenced those listening, because deep down it sounded familiar, not about elephants, but about people. How often do we carry the same belief? How often do we stop trying because something once didn't work? We remember the pain of rejection, the sting of failure, the embarrassment of falling short. And like the elephants, we begin to believe that trying again would be useless. The man watching them couldn't shake the thought. It stayed with him, echoing in his mind long after he left the camp. He started to notice similar ropes in his own life, limitations he'd accepted, not because they were still true, but because they had once been true. He had grown, changed, overcome so much, yet there were things he still didn't try. Dreams he shelved, challenges he avoided, because somewhere along the way he had decided they weren't possible. He had believed the rope was still holding him. It became clear that the real chain wasn't the rope, but the belief. And that belief, if left unquestioned, would quietly control a life. Strength means nothing without the courage to test the limits. Freedom means nothing without the will to move. The elephants had everything they needed to walk away, but they stayed because they believed they couldn't, so they didn't. It's a quiet kind of tragedy, not the kind you see, but the kind that hides in the mind, the kind where giants live small, where dreams grow dusty, and where invisible ropes hold back those who were born to be free. The lesson was unmistakable. Believing you're trapped can be more powerful than actually being trapped. And sometimes all it takes to change everything is the decision to try again, to test the rope, to take one step, to prove to yourself that what once held you no longer has the strength to do so. The story shows how limiting beliefs can stop us, even when we have the power to overcome. The elephants, mighty and majestic, are among the most powerful animals on earth. Yet in the camp they stand quietly, restrained by nothing more than a thin rope tied to a small stake in the ground. Anyone who sees them wonders how such large, capable creatures remain so still, so docile, so confined. The answer, however, isn't found in the rope, it's found in what they believe. When the elephants were young, the same rope was tied around their leg. At that age, it was enough to hold them. They weren't strong enough to pull free. And so they tried again and again. They pulled, tugged, fought, and struggled, but they couldn't escape. After many failed attempts, a quiet decision formed in their minds. Escape is impossible. It didn't matter how determined they were. It didn't matter how much they wanted freedom. Their efforts always ended in defeat. And so they gave up, not because they were weak, but because they had learned to believe they were. Years passed. The elephants grew. Their muscles strengthened. Their legs became pillars of strength. Their bodies capable of great feats. But one thing remained the same: the belief. They had accepted the idea that the rope was unbreakable. So even now, with the strength to tear down trees, they do not try to break free, because they believe they can't. And so they never test it. They never challenge the rope again. It's not the rope that holds them, it's the invisible chain wrapped around their thoughts. This is the silent power of limiting beliefs. They creep in early, often during moments of failure or pain. A child who's told they aren't good enough may carry that belief for years, even into adulthood. A person who stumbles once may decide they'll always fall. Someone who tries and fails may choose never to try again. And with time, the belief becomes stronger than the failure itself. We no longer remember what we tried, we only remember how it felt to fail. The man visiting the elephant camp realizes this. He sees the truth reflected not just in the animals, but in himself. He begins to wonder, what ropes am I still tied to? What beliefs have I accepted that no longer belong to me? The elephant's rope is thin and worn, a symbol of something long outgrown. How many of us are held by the same kind of thing? A fear, a doubt, a memory of the past that no longer fits the strength we have today. The tragedy isn't in the rope, it's in the quiet resignation, the decision not to try, the loss of belief in what is possible. These elephants could walk away, they could be free in an instant, but they don't believe it, and so they stay. And the same thing happens to people every day. We stay in jobs we don't love, avoid dreams we once chased, and silence the voice inside that whispers we were made for more. Not because we can't, but because somewhere along the way we started to believe we couldn't. The rope is only a rope. It has no power unless we surrender to it. Our beliefs, however, shape the borders of our lives, and if we never question them, they quietly become the walls we live within. The story of the elephants is not just about animals, it's a mirror. It asks one simple question: are you being held back by something real or by something you only believe is real? Because you may have outgrown the rope a long time ago, and you just haven't realized it yet.